The story of Noah and the Great Flood is one of humanity's most enduring narratives. It speaks of divine judgment, catastrophic destruction, and miraculous salvation. This powerful tale resonates deeply across cultures and centuries. It holds a central place in the sacred texts and traditions of three major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All recount the story of a righteous man, a divine warning, and a vessel built to survive a global deluge. While the core elements are shared, the details of the narrative vary significantly among these faiths. This program explores these variations. We will examine how the story is told in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Old Testament, and the Quran. Our focus is on the differences and similarities in these accounts. We aim to understand why these details diverge. What do these variations tell us about the distinct theological perspectives of each tradition? The story begins with a world deemed corrupt and violent by its creator. A divine decision is made to cleanse the earth. Only one man, Noah, is found righteous enough to be spared. He is instructed to build a massive vessel, an ark, to save himself, his family, and pairs of all living creatures. The flood comes, covering the highest mountains. After the waters recede, life begins anew from those preserved within the ark. This narrative is more than just an ancient myth. It is a foundational story about humanity's relationship with the divine. It explores themes of sin, repentance, judgment, grace, and the promise of renewal. Our exploration will use a comparative approach. We will look at specific elements of the story side by side. This method allows for a clear and concise examination of the differences. We will pose a central question throughout this analysis. Why do the specific details of the flood narrative diverge across these three Abrahamic faiths? Understanding these differences offers insights into the unique theological and interpretive traditions of each religion. Let us begin our comparative analysis by examining the ark itself. The vessel built by Noah is central to the story of survival. Its description varies between the biblical and Quranic accounts. The book of Genesis provides precise measurements for the ark. It specifies its length, width, and height. These dimensions are given in cubits, an ancient unit of measurement. According to Genesis chapter 6, the ark was to be 300 cubits long. Its width was to be 50 cubits. The height was specified as 30 cubits. A cubit is generally understood to be the length from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. This measurement varied historically, but is often estimated to be around 18 inches or 45 centimeters. Using this estimate, the biblical ark would be approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The biblical account also describes the ark's structure. It was to have 3 decks or stories. It had a door in its side and a window near the top. The material was gopher wood, sealed with pitch inside and out. The Quran also describes Noah building an ark under divine guidance. However, it does not provide specific dimensions for the vessel. The Quran refers to it as a ship or ark, but does not give its length, width, or height in cubits or any other unit. For example, Surah Hud, verse 37, mentions Noah building the ark under our observation and our inspiration. Surah Al-Mu'minun, verse 27, refers to it as the ship. The focus in the Quran is on the divine command and the successful construction, not the precise measurements. Islamic tradition and commentary have sometimes inferred details or discussed potential dimensions. However, these are not explicitly stated in the Quranic text itself. The Quran emphasizes the ark's function as a means of salvation. The difference in specifying dimensions is significant. The biblical account offers a concrete, measurable structure. This has led to centuries of discussion and attempts to understand the feasibility of such a vessel. The Quranic account focuses more on the miraculous nature of the event and God's direct involvement. The lack of specific dimensions might emphasize that its construction and ability to carry all life were by divine power, not human engineering alone. This difference reflects distinct narrative styles and theological emphases. The biblical text often includes detailed specifications, whether for the ark, the tabernacle, or the temple. This detail can serve various purposes, including demonstrating obedience to divine command, or providing a basis for later interpretation and symbolism. The Quran, while sometimes providing detailed accounts, often focuses on the core message and moral lessons. The emphasis is frequently on God's power, the prophet's obedience, and the consequences of belief or disbelief. The exact size of the ark may be less important than the fact that it was built according to God's will and served its purpose. So, the first key difference lies in the description of the ark itself. The Bible gives precise measurements, while the Quran does not. This sets a pattern for other variations we will explore. Another significant point of comparison is the duration of the flood event. How long did the waters cover the earth? The accounts in the Bible and Islamic tradition offer different time frames. The biblical account in Genesis provides a detailed chronology of the flood. It specifies the duration of the rain, the time the waters prevailed, and the period until the earth was dry. The most commonly cited duration for the active phase of the flood is 40 days and 40 nights. Genesis chapter 7 states that the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters then prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. After this, the waters began to recede. Noah and those with him remained in the ark for over a year in total. From the beginning of the flood until Noah and his family left the ark, approximately 1 year and 10 days passed according to the Genesis timeline. However, the period of intense flooding and the waters covering the earth is often highlighted by the 40-day rain and the 150 days of prevailing waters. The Islamic tradition, drawing from the Quran and Hadith, presents a different time frame for the flood's duration. The Quran itself does not specify the exact number of days or years the flood lasted. However, it describes the event and its aftermath. Islamic scholars and commentators, relying on various traditions, often state a different duration. A widely cited duration in Islamic sources is 6 months. Some traditions mention other lengths, but 6 months is frequently mentioned as the time the ark was upon the water. For example, some narrations suggest the flood lasted for 6 months, ending on the 10th day of Muharram, known as Ashura. This day is significant in Islamic tradition for various reasons, including the ark's landing. The difference between the biblical 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and a total period of over a year in the ark, versus an Islamic tradition of perhaps 6 months on the water, is notable. It indicates different narrative structures and perhaps different emphases on the timeline of events. The biblical account's detailed chronology allows for a precise tracking of the flood's progression. It marks specific days for the rain starting, the waters peaking, the ark resting, and the land drying. This provides a clear sequence of events. The Islamic account, as found in the Quran, focuses more on the divine command, Noah's preaching, the people's rejection, the building of the ark, the flood as a punishment, and the salvation of Noah and the believers. The exact duration is less central to the Quranic narrative's primary message. The variations in duration highlight how each tradition structures and emphasizes different aspects of the story. The biblical account provides a detailed historical-like record. The Quranic account focuses on the theological and moral lessons. This difference in focus is consistent with the overall styles of the two scriptures. The Bible, particularly the Old Testament historical books, often provides detailed timelines and genealogies. The Quran focuses more on universal messages, prophetic examples, and theological principles, often recounting events concisely. Thus, the duration of the flood is another key point where the narratives diverge. The Bible offers a specific, longer timeline, while Islamic tradition often cites a shorter period for the ark's journey on the water. A third significant difference lies in the number of human survivors who were on the ark with Noah. Both the biblical and Islamic accounts agree that Noah and his immediate family were saved. However, they differ on the total number of people. The biblical account in Genesis is quite specific about the human occupants of the ark. It states that Noah, his wife, and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives were on the ark. This totals 8 people. Genesis chapter 7, verse 13 states, "On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark." This clearly lists 8 individuals. These 8 people are presented as the progenitors of the post-flood human race. All humanity is said to descend from Noah's 3 sons and their wives. The Islamic tradition, while agreeing that Noah and his family were saved, often mentions a larger number of survivors. The Quran refers to those who believed with him being saved. Surah Hud, verse 40 says, "And we carried him on a ship of planks and nails, sailing under our observation, a reward for he who had been denied. Until, when our command came and the oven overflowed, we said, Load therein 2 of each type and your family, except those against whom the word has already come, and whoever has believed, and none had believed with him except a few." The phrase "except a few," illa qalila, in Surah Hud, verse 40, is interpreted in various ways by Islamic scholars. Some interpret "a few" to mean only Noah's immediate family, similar to the biblical account. However, many traditional Islamic sources and commentaries suggest a larger number of believers joined Noah. A widely cited number in Islamic tradition for the total human survivors is 80. This number is often mentioned in historical and exegetical works. These 80 would include Noah, his family, and other believers from his community who heeded his call and were allowed onto the ark. This difference in the number of survivors is significant. The biblical account emphasizes the direct lineage from Noah's immediate family. It presents a very narrow bottleneck for the repopulation of the earth. The Islamic tradition, by suggesting a larger group of believers, highlights the theme of faith and community. It emphasizes that salvation was not solely based on kinship, but also on belief in Noah's message. The few believers represent the righteous remnant from Noah's generation. This variation reflects different theological emphases. The biblical narrative focuses on the covenant with Noah and his descendants as the new beginning for humanity. The Islamic narrative emphasizes the principle that salvation is for those who believe and follow God's messenger, regardless of family ties, as seen in the case of Noah's disbelieving son. The story of Noah's disbelieving son, who refuses to enter the ark and perishes in the flood, is prominent in the Quran, Surah Hud, verses 42 to 47. This serves as a powerful lesson that divine judgment is based on faith and obedience, not merely on family connection to a prophet. This episode is not present in the biblical narrative, where all of Noah's sons are saved. So the number of human survivors is another key point of divergence. The Bible states 8 people, while Islamic tradition often suggests 80, including Noah's family and other believers. This difference underscores distinct theological perspectives on salvation and community. Moving beyond the purely religious narratives, the story of Noah's Ark has sparked interest in modern times from various perspectives. These include scientific inquiry and historical analysis, seeking potential connections to real-world events and locations. One area of interest is the potential resting place of the Ark. Both the Bible and the Quran mention mountains where the Ark came to rest after the floodwaters receded. These locations have been the subject of much speculation and exploration. The book of Genesis states that the Ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, Genesis 8:4. Mount Ararat is a large, snow-capped, dormant volcano in eastern Turkey. It is the highest peak in Turkey and has long been associated with the Ark's landing site in Christian and Jewish tradition. The Quran states that the Ark came to rest on Judi, Surah Hud, verse 44. The location of Mount Judi is traditionally identified with a peak in the Judi Dağ mountain range, also in southeastern Turkey, near the borders of Syria and Iraq. This location is distinct from Mount Ararat. The difference in the named resting place is another point of variation between the biblical and Quranic accounts. Both locations are within the broader region of ancient Mesopotamia and the Near East, where early civilizations arose. Modern exploration and research have investigated both Mount Ararat and Mount Judi. Expeditions have searched for physical evidence of a large vessel. To date, no conclusive scientific evidence has been found on either mountain that definitively proves it is the remains of Noah's Ark. These explorations, while often driven by faith, intersect with geographical and geological considerations. The search for the Ark's resting place sparks curiosity and highlights the geographical context of the narrative. Beyond potential physical evidence of the Ark, scientists and historians have explored whether the flood narrative could be related to real historical or geological events. One prominent theory is the Black Sea deluge hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that around 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, significantly smaller than it is today. A sudden and catastrophic inflow of salt water from the Mediterranean Sea, possibly due to the breaching of a land bridge or sill at the Bosphorus Strait, caused the lake to rapidly expand, flooding coastal settlements. This event, if it occurred as hypothesized, would have been a regional catastrophe of immense scale for the people living around the lake. It could potentially have served as a historical memory that was later incorporated into flood myths. Another area of historical context involves ancient Mesopotamian flood myths. The Epic of Gilgamesh, an ancient Babylonian epic, contains a flood narrative that predates the biblical account. In this story, a character named Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a boat to save himself, his family, and animals from a flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. There are striking parallels between the Gilgamesh flood story and the biblical account of Noah. Both involve divine warning, building an ark, saving family and animals, sending out birds to check for dry land, and offering a sacrifice after surviving the flood. These Mesopotamian myths, along with other flood narratives from various cultures around the world, suggest that stories of great floods were widespread in the ancient world. This could point to a common origin, cultural diffusion, or perhaps shared human experiences of significant flood events. Acknowledging these scientific and historical references is important for a comprehensive understanding of the Noah story. The Black Sea deluge theory offers a potential geological backdrop for a regional flood event. The Mesopotamian myths provide a literary and cultural context, showing that flood narratives were part of the ancient Near Eastern cultural landscape. These connections do not necessarily prove or disprove the religious accounts. For believers, the religious narratives hold theological truth, regardless of scientific or historical correlation. However, exploring these connections encourages critical thinking. It allows us to consider the historical and geological evidence alongside the religious texts. It prompts questions about the relationship between myth, history, and scripture. Are these religious narratives purely theological, or do they contain echoes of real events? Different perspectives exist on this. Some view the religious accounts as literal historical records. Others see them as divinely inspired narratives conveying theological truth through symbolic or allegorical language, potentially incorporating elements from the cultural context of the time. The exploration of potential ark locations, the Black Sea deluge theory, and Mesopotamian flood myths adds layers of complexity to the study of the Noah story. It moves the discussion beyond internal religious interpretation to consider external evidence and comparative mythology. It invites the audience to consider the story from multiple angles. How do scientific theories about past geological events relate to religious accounts of a global flood? How do flood narratives in different ancient cultures compare? And what does this tell us about their origins and transmission? These questions are fascinating and continue to be debated among scholars across various disciplines. They highlight the enduring power and relevance of the Noah story, not just as a religious text, but as a narrative that intersects with history, geography, and human culture. Considering these modern connections and historical context enriches our understanding. It allows for a more nuanced appreciation of the Noah story's place in human thought and history. It encourages a dialogue between faith, reason, and historical inquiry. We have explored the story of Noah's Ark as it is told in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We have seen that while the core narrative of divine judgment and salvation through an ark is shared, significant details diverge. We examined differences in the description of the ark's dimensions, the duration of the flood, and the number of human survivors. The biblical account in Genesis provides precise measurements for the ark, a detailed timeline spanning over a year, and states 8 human survivors. The Islamic tradition, drawing from the Quran and Hadith, does not specify the ark's dimensions in the Quran, often cites a shorter duration for the ark's time on the water, such as 6 months, and frequently mentions 80 human survivors, including Noah's family and other believers. These differences are not mere discrepancies. They reflect distinct theological emphases and narrative styles within each tradition. The biblical account often focuses on lineage, covenant, and detailed historical-like records. The Islamic account emphasizes God's power, the principle of salvation through faith, and moral lessons. We also touched upon modern connections and historical context. The search for the ark's resting place on mountains like Ararat and Judy continues, though without definitive scientific proof. Theories like the Black Sea deluge hypothesis offer potential geological backdrops for regional flood events that could have inspired ancient myths. Furthermore, the existence of older Mesopotamian flood myths, such as the one in the Epic of Gilgamesh, highlights the presence of similar narratives in the ancient Near East. These connections prompt us to consider the relationship between religious texts, historical events, and cultural transmission. The story of Noah's Ark remains a powerful narrative across these 3 faiths. It speaks to fundamental human concerns about sin, judgment, righteousness, and the possibility of a new beginning. Its variations across traditions offer a rich field for comparative study. Understanding these differences fosters a deeper appreciation for the unique interpretive traditions and theological perspectives of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It shows how a shared foundational story can be understood and transmitted in distinct ways, each carrying its own layers of meaning and significance. The story invites continued reflection. It challenges us to consider its theological implications, its potential historical echoes, and its enduring message for humanity. It is a testament to the power of narrative to convey profound truths across generations and cultures.